The world is never short of advice. You have self-help books, sermons, influencers, celebrities, and even TikTokers regularly dispensing advice on every aspect of your social life. If you want to know how to win friends and even influence people, how to capture hearts and change minds, how to believe in yourself or doubt other people, then somebody out there will tell you the 5 easy steps to do these things. But social psychology offers you something better than advice. It can give you insight. Now, this course uses the tools of science to understand why people behave as they do, why they are attracted to some people but not others, why they are not convinced by elegant political arguments and scientific facts, but are persuaded by celebrity endorsements and conspiracy theories. Where does prejudice come from, and how does it influence our thought and action? In this course, you will see how experimental methods can be used to reveal the inner workings of all of these psychological phenomena. And yes, there is a bit of advice on the side too. Now, social psychology is a fascinating science. It investigates feelings, thoughts, cultures, and the way that people relate to one another. Before social science, these aspects of human life were discussed only in the context of art, religion, and philosophy. But now, humans can generate scientific knowledge about their social selves. And although the study of social psychology has gone through several changes in its short history, its goals have remained constant: to understand people and their relationship to each other. Now, in this video, I will define social psychology, discuss its big ideas, the role of values in the field, and the research method used to study social phenomena. Now, as the field of psychology matured, researchers began to focus on specialized aspects of the mind and behavior. This gave rise to the subcategories of psychology, including social psychology. Myers defined it as a science that studies the influence of our situation with special attention to how we view and affect one another. If you think about it, social psychology is one of the broadest and most complex subcategories because it's concerned with self-perception and the behavioral interplay between the individual who make up society. Now, more precisely, it's the scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. Now, social psychologists study social thinking, which includes perception of ourselves and others, what we believe, and judgments we make, and our attitudes. They also study social influences encompassing culture, pressures to conform, and persuasion. Lastly, they study the full range of social relations from prejudice and aggression to attraction, intimacy, and helping behaviors. Now, the field of social psychology and sociology are sometimes confused. This is understandable because both fields of study are broadly concerned with the way human behavior shapes and is shaped by society. Social psychology lies at the boundary or at psychology's boundary with sociology. In fact, the field of social psychology has traditionally been described as the bridge between psychology and sociology. But compared with sociology, or the study of people in groups and societies, social psychology focuses more on individuals and use more experimentation. In other words, social psychologists study individuals within a group, while sociologists study groups of people. Now, In many academic fields, the results of tens of thousands of studies, the conclusions of thousands of investigation, and the insight of hundreds of theories can be boiled down to a few central ideas. Biology offers us principles such as natural selection and adaptation. Sociology builds on concepts such as social structure and organization. Music, on the other hand, harness our ideas of rhythm, melody, and harmony. What concepts are on social psychology's short list of big ideas? What themes or fundamental principles will be worth remembering long after you have forgotten most of the details? Now, Myers' short list of great ideas we ought never to forget includes these things. Each of which will be explored further in the future lessons, but let us run through them here. Now, here are Myers' 6 big ideas of sociology that deconstruct our social reality. Our social intuitions are powerful but sometimes perilous. Social influences shape our behavior. Social behavior is biologically rooted. Personal attitudes and dispositions also shape our behavior, and social psychology's principles are applicable to everyday life. Now, the first of which is that we construct our social reality. We humans have an irresistible urge to explain behavior, to attribute it to some cause, and therefore to make it seem orderly, predictable, and controllable. You and I may react differently to similar situations because we think differently. Your reaction, let's say, towards the presence of pineapple in pizza is based on so many factors, many of which you are not entirely aware of. Our beliefs about ourselves also matter. Do we have an optimistic outlook? Do we see ourselves as in control of things? Do we view ourselves as relatively superior or inferior to other people? Our answers influence our emotions and actions. How we construe the world and ourselves matter. Now, the second is that our social institutions or intuitions are often powerful but sometimes perilous. Our instant intuitions shape our fears. Are vaccine safe? Impressions, can I trust the president? And relationship, does she like me? Intuitions influence presidents in times of crisis. Gamblers at the table, jurors assessing guilt, and personnel directors screening applicants. Well, such intuitions are commonplace. Intuitions influence everyone. While they allow us to react fast, they are easily deceived and can be dangerous too. Even our intuitions about ourselves are often err. We intuitively trust our memories more than we should. We misread our own minds. In experiments, we deny being affected by things that do influence us. We misinterpret our own feelings, how bad we'll feel a year from now if we lose our jobs or our romance breaks up, and how good we'll feel a year from now or even a week from now if we win our state's lottery. Now, we often mispredict our own future. For example, when selecting clothes, people approaching middle age will still buy snug or snug fit. They would tell themselves that they are anticipating to shed a few pounds. Rarely does anyone say more realistically, I'd better buy a relatively loose fit. People my age tend to put on weight. Now, our social intuitions then are noteworthy for both their powers and their perils, but reminding us of our intuition's gifts and alerting us of its pitfalls. Social psychologists aim to fortify our thinking. Now, in most situations, fast and frugal snap. snap judgments serve us well enough, but in others where accuracy matters, as when needing to fear the right things and spend our resources accordingly, we had better best restrain our impulsive intuition with critical thinking. Our intuitions and unconscious information processing are routinely powerful and sometimes perilous. The third is that social influences shape our behavior. As social creatures, we respond to our immediate context. Sometimes, the power of a social situation lead us to act contrary to our expressed attitudes. Indeed, powerful evil situations sometimes overwhelm good intentions, inducing people to agree with falsehood or comply with cruelty. Under Nazi influence, many decent-seeming people became instruments of the Holocaust. During the height of the drug war in the Philippines, many God-fearing Filipinos supported the killings, and when martial law was imposed in Mindanao and the president joked about rape, some of his supporters even admired the idea. Remember, people are malleable. We adapt to our social context. Our attitudes and behaviors are influenced by internal social factors. Standards regarding promptness, frankness, and clothing vary from one culture to the next. Whether you prefer a slim or voluptuous body depends on when and where in the world you live. Whether you define social justice as equality, that is, all receive the same, or as equity, those who earn more receive more, depend on whether your ideology has been shaped more by socialism or by capitalism. Whether you support activism or look down on people who criticize the government hinges partly on your culture and your religion. Whether you focus primarily on yourself, your personal needs, desires, and morality, or on your family, clan, and communal groups, depend on how much you are a product of modern Western individualism. Now, the next is that personal attitudes also and dispositions also shape behavior. Remember, internal forces also matter. We are not passive tumbleweeds, merely blown this way and that by social winds. Our inner attitudes affect our behavior. Our political attitudes influence our voting behavior. Our smoking attitudes influence our susceptibility to peer pressure to smoke. Our attitudes towards the poor influence our willingness to help them. As we will see later on, our attitudes also follow our behavior, which leads us to believe strongly in those things we have committed ourselves, or or suffered for. Now, personality dispositions also affect behavior. Facing the same situation, different people may react differently. In this image, majority of local leaders were happy to don the Duterte feast sign. However, Pasig City Mayor Vico Soto rejected the social pressure. The next is that social behavior is biologically rooted. 21st century social psychology is providing us with every growing insight into our behavior's biological foundations. Many of our social behaviors reflect a deep biological wisdom. Everyone who has taken introductory to psychology has learned that nature and nurture together form who we are. As the area of a rectangle is determined by both its length and its width, so do biology and experience together create us. From attraction to helping behavior, many of our social behaviors reflect deep biological wisdom. To understand social behavior, we have to consider both under the skin, that is biological, and between the skin, that is social influences. We are, after all, biopsychosocial organisms. So the next is that social psychologist principles are applicable in everyday life. So social psychology has the potential to illuminate your life, to make visible the subtle influences that guide your thinking and acting. And as we will see, it offers many ideas about how to know ourselves better, how to win friends and influence people, how to transform closed fists into open arms. Scholars are also applying social psychological insights. Principles of social thinking, social influence, and social relations have implications for human health and well-being, for judicial procedures and juror decisions in courtroom, and for influencing behaviors that will enable an environmentally sustainable human future. As but one perspective on human existence, psychological science does not seek to engage life's ultimate question. What is the meaning of human life? What should be our purpose? What is our ultimate destiny? But social psychology do give us a method for asking and answering some exceedingly interesting and important questions. Social psychology is all about life, your beliefs, your attitudes, and your relationships. So, social psychologists values penetrate their work in ways both obvious and subtle. Values like community, generosity, strength, joy, reliability, things that you can see in this graphic. Um, what are such ways, you may ask? Social psychology is less a collection of findings than a set of strategies for answering questions. In science, as in courts of law, personal opinions are inadmissible. When ideas are put on trial, evidence determines the verdict. But are social psychologists really that objective? Because they are human beings, don't their values, their personal convictions about what is desirable and how people ought to behave seep into their work? If so, can social psychology really be scientific? Now, we are going to look at obvious and not so obvious ways values enter psychology. So, let's first look at obvious ways values enter psychology. Values enter the picture when social psychologists, number one, choose a research topic or research topics. It was no accident that the study of prejudice flourished during the 1940s as fascism raged in Europe. Contrast that with the 2000s heightened interest in how people respond to diversity and culture, or in culture, race, and sexual orientation. You see, social psychology reflects social history. The second reason is that values differ not only across time, but also across cultures. It's no secret that Philippine elections are influenced by baluartes or places where certain candidates are supported. There are also religious groups who not only endorse, but control which candidate should be voted by their members. Number three, values also influence the type of people who are attracted to various disciplines. Consider this, or ask yourself, at our school, do students majoring in different fields differ noticeably from one another? Do social psychology and sociology attract people who are, for example, relatively eager to challenge traditions? People more inclined to shape the future that preserve the past? Finally, values obviously enter the picture as the object of social psychological analysis. Social psychologists investigate how values form, why they change, and how they influence attitudes and actions. None of that, however, tell us which values are right. So, after looking at obvious ways values enter psychology, it's also good to look at not so obvious ways values enter the field. We less often recognize the subtler ways in which value commitment masquerade as objective truth. Consider three not so obvious ways values enter psychology. First is that science is not purely objective. It's colored by our biases. Scientists do not simply read the book by nature. Rather, they interpret nature using their own mental categories. For example, statistics show IQ disparities between races. And these findings were used to justify the idea that Black Americans are less than white Americans. Yes, there are differences in measures, or rather in measured IQ between various races. But this does not mean that one race is smarter than the other or than others. Instead, the scores reflect some impossible to sort out combinations of abilities. And differences in opportunities, motivation, and resources, things that the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu regard as cultural capital or social assets of a person that promotes social mobility in a stratified society. Because scholars at work in any given areas often share common viewpoint, their assumptions may also go unchallenged. Also, social representations are socially shared beliefs, including our assumptions and cultural ideologies. Our social representations help us make sense of the world. So, implicit in our understanding that psychology is not objective, is the realization that psychologists' own values may play an important part in the theories and judgment they support. Psychologists may refer to people as mature or immature, as well-adjusted or poorly adjusted, as mentally healthy or mentally fit. They may talk as if they were stating facts when they're really making value judgment. Here are some examples of that. Number one, values influence our idea of the best way to live our lives. The personality psychologist Abraham Maslow, for example, was known for his sensitive descriptions of self-actualizing people. People who, with their needs for survival, safety, belonging, and self-esteem satisfied, go on to fulfill their human potential. Few readers notice that Maslow himself, guided by his own values, selected the sample of self-actualized people he described. The resulting descriptions of self-actualized people or personalities as spontaneous, autonomous, mystical, and so forth reflected that bias. Maslow's personal values his bias and his personal values. He had begun with someone's, or rather, had he begun with someone's hero, say Napoleon or Alexander the Great or even Ferdinand Marcos, his resulting descriptions of self-actualization would have differed. The second is that psychological advice also reflects the advice giver's personal values. When mental health professionals advise us to, or rather how to get along with our spouse or our co-workers, when child-rearing experts tell us how to handle our children, and when some psychologists advocate living free of concern for others' expectations, they are expressing their personal values. Many people unaware of those hidden values defer to the professional, but professional psychologists cannot answer question of ultimate moral obligation, of purpose and direction, and of life's meaning. To quote Abe Maslow that we have mentioned earlier, he said that I suppose it's tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it was or as if it were a nail. So the next is that value judgments then are often hidden within our social psychological language. But that is also true of everyday language. Look at this Facebook post by the actress and Duterte supporter Vivian Velez. Value lies hidden within our cultural definitions as seen in this post. Cultural definitions of mental health, our psychological advice for living, or our concepts and our psychological labels. Throughout our lesson, I will call your attention to additional examples of hidden values. The point is never that the implicit values are necessarily bad. The point is that scientific interpretations, even at the level of labeling phenomena, is a human activity. It's therefore natural and inevitable that prior beliefs and values will influence what social psychologists think and write. Lastly, it's important to talk about the issue whether social psychology is just common sense in fancy term. Do social psychologists' theories provide new insight into the human condition, or do they only describe the obvious? As my late mother used to say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. People with limited ideas of how the mind works or how other people relate with other people often criticize social psychology as just common sense. One problem with common sense is that we invoke it after we have known the facts. Events are far more obvious in hindsight than beforehand. Experiments reveal that our outcomes are more obvious after the facts are known. This is called the hindsight bias, or it's the tendency to exaggerate after learning an outcome, our ability to have foreseen how something turned out. So, aside from all this, it's also important that we talk about research methods in social psychology. The question is that what makes social psychology as a science lies in research. Now, a theory, it all starts with a theory. A theory is an integrative set of principles that explain and predict observed events. Theories are a scientific shorthand. In everyday conversation, theory often means less than fact. A mid-rung on a confidence ladder that, from guess to theory to fact. Like when they claim that you can get COVID-19 from vaccines. But to scientists, or to a scientist, facts and theories are apples and oranges. Facts are agreed upon statements about what we observe. For example, when you drop a pencil, it falls down to the ground. Theories, on the other hand, are ideas that summarize and explain facts. Like mass and energy causes space-time to curve, and the force of gravity arises from the curvature of space-time. A theory is the granddaddy of all scientific statements, which is why it makes no sense to say that evolution is just a theory, because evolution is only a theory, but so is gravity. People often respond that gravity is a fact, but the fact is that your keys fall, or your pencil fall to the ground when dropped, and gravity is the theoretical explanation that accounts for such observed fact. So stop saying theory like it's a bad thing. Calling it a theory means it passed the toughest test that we can throw at it, and evolution has been tested many more than any theory that we know of. So, theories are not only are not only summaries or summarized, but also imply testable predictions called hypotheses. Now, hypotheses serve several purposes. First, um, they allow us to test a theory by suggesting how we might try to falsify it. Second, is that it gives us direction um, to research and sometimes send investigators looking for things they might never have thought of. And third, the predictive feature of good theories can also make them practical. So, let us consider how this works by devising a theory on aggression that predicts when to expect aggression and how to control it. We observe that people who loot, taunt, or attack often do so in groups or in crowds. So we devise a hypothesis saying that being part of a crowd or group makes individuals feel anonymous and lowers their inhibition. We could devise a laboratory experiment simulating aspects of execution by electric chair. What if we asked individuals in groups to administer punishing shocks to a hapless victim without knowing which member of the group was actually shocking the victim? Would these individuals administer stronger shocks than individuals acting alone, as our theory predict? We can even manipulate anonymity. Would people deliver stronger shocks if they were wearing masks? So, if the results confirm our hypothesis, they might suggest something or some practical applications. Perhaps, police brutality and non-laban incidences could be reduced by having officers wear large name tags or body cameras. So, the question now is, how do we evaluate a theory? Now, a good theory effectively summarizes many observations and make clear predictions that we can use to confirm or modify the theory, generate new explorations, and suggest practical applications. We can discard theories usually if it's not. Usually, it's when we rather discard theories. Usually, it's not because they have been proved false. Rather, like old cars, they are replaced by newer, better models. So, in this lesson, we defined social psychology, differentiated it with sociology, talked about social psychology's big ideas, described how values enter science, and worked on theories and hypotheses. So at this point, this ends our first lesson on social psychology. My name is Dex Kamitan, and thank you for watching.